Let's give a second. Screen make this really big.
What do you want to do? Oh, view, go to view. Up at the right top. Speaker, maybe? No, that's not it. It should just be gallery. That's weird. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, even more than you do.
So the surface. Even well, yeah, no, he's not gone. Oh, the surface, yeah. We're not quite on yet, right?
We are live.
We are live.
We are live?
We are
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting of the planning commission to order. It's 4:32. And we're gonna go through roll call again because we've had a couple of requests to identify who we are since we don't sit in front of signs with our names on it. So I'm Bob O'Brien, I'm chair of the planning commission. I'm Jerry Claes.
Aaron Lindbergh.
And maybe we could, there we go, we're gonna get pictures for people to see. Steve, are you ready? Yeah.
Yep, Steve Evers, planning commissioner present.
Emily Campbell, soon to be departed once we have a replacement selected.
Okay, and
What'd you say?
you were still in the room. There we
McKenna
go.
Berkeley.
And we have citizens to be heard. If there's anyone who wants to speak on a matter that's not on the agenda here. And if you're online, kind of just interrupt us. Okay. Next, anybody have any ex parte communications or disclosures? Okay, there's none, and approval of the minutes. Which I assume everyone's had a chance to read.
Let's clear those up, shall we? Oh, we do need to clarify something from the minutes, on the vote from last time around.
That was a little confusing.
So, Michael, I'll just let you describe it. 'cause we
Okay,
already-
when I did the playback from Zoom at the point in the meeting where we did call for a vote and there was other voices going, I did not hear that vote. So I put an asterisk in the minutes. And then continued to take minutes and then recorded the vote at the end
Yeah.
of that. Where I made known that I did not hear the vote, we did not record the vote, could we get that vote again, and we did so. So I just want to know how you want to resolve that situation. I can put in parentheses that due to disruption or whatever, that the vote was not
It was,
heard or.
yeah, I think what I'll describe what I think happened. I think I called for the vote. The vote was a little different than the final vote. I thought I was closing the meeting and saying, but it's perfectly fine to talk to people and find out what they think. Then some of the people who had voted thought it was a straw poll. And since that happened, I said, well, if you thought it was a straw poll, probably the right thing to do now is to vote and know it's the vote. And that's the one you recorded. So I think that's what happened. That's my recollection too.
Okay,
I'll make sure that's reflected in the minute.
and so we did get
Turn in favor and
the
one.
actual numbers or the count, okay?
And the count that she put down was the count of the second vote, but if some people thought it had been a straw poll at the start, that seems to be what we should have down there.
Okay.
That's the vote.
Great, and then the other thing with that vote that happened at that meeting that we need to kind of look into in our bylaws, but because there was one abstention and how many absent, however many absent. And then so there was only
There were only three in
Three.
favor, yeah.
in favor, which you need 4 in order to have a actual determination. So we were kind of thinking going forward, I don't know, but I think we might have to make sure that we have at least 4 votes. So in order to make the actual determination. So in that instance, it might have been the thing to do is we would have had to maybe go back and say, okay, everybody actually needs to vote. And, right, because you can't end it just with 3.
I thought we had 3 yes and 1 no,
It was 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstention.
right? And so we had 4 votes,
It has to be, the bylaws say there has to be 4 in favor of the motion,
right?
not just 4 votes, 4 in favor.
Yeah, so it didn't pass.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I guess my question is with 3 for, 1 against and 1 abstention, is it still a legitimate vote? It just failed to pass.
That's what we were.
That's what I
We were
think.
kind of
That word, I
trying to.
never heard that word.
Yeah, that would be my understanding of it.
Yeah, that's
We've,
fine.
we've had that situation in the past where we've had a split vote, for example, even with a quorum. And because the planning commission can't send forward a recommendation not to take action, then it's essentially a neutral recommendation with context that can be provided by staff.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Emily.
And Emily, would you agree they could say there were 3 in favor, 1 opposed, yeah, so that they can get flavor for what came out, but we didn't recommend it officially.
Got it, okay.
As long as we had a quorum, we met the state requirements for participation, and then the recording of the vote is, the context that the county commission needs. They're not under any obligation to follow our recommendation anyway, so it's just added weight to give that extra information.
Okay, that's actually, it gives us more clarity. So, does somebody make a motion on the minutes as they're going to be revised here to get that scenario in of that vote, which was an odd situation?
I could make a motion. I never get to make motions. This is exciting.
Is there a second, however?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, unanimous. And I guess we're up to presentations. Somebody's gonna tell us maybe about what happened at the county meeting, because I guess Trish is
Oh,
here.
Trish is not here, right? Let's see, we had the ADO ITAs at the last commission meeting and, there were just the 2 that were the follow-up ones. Because, at the previous ITA round, Mary McGann was, absent. And so they wanted to have an opportunity for Commissioner McGann to weigh in on these applications that were kind of like on the fence of whether or not they were gonna have a majority or not. So at that meeting, Commissioner McGann was able to vote and they both
They both were approved.
were approved to move forward with the full application. And those were, for how many units?
8 units in total, 4 on each, 2 side-by-side adjacent parcels at the corner of Spanish Valley, and Spanish Trail Road. So 2812 and 2810 Spanish Valley Drive, very beside each other.
Yeah. I don't think we had anything else on the agenda for land.
I did not.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm sorry, we did. We had a workshop earlier that afternoon, with the folks from the Housing Task Force. Laura and, Caitlin and myself were there to present the draft final version of the Moab area affordable housing plan. And that was the first time that they presented it in its kind of final format. So the commission heard a presentation and then there was a little bit of discussion on the data and kind of clarifying what the data meant. And Commissioner Walker had some ideas for maybe some different data sets that we could use. But it was basically an opportunity for them to just see it, understand what it is, because it's been in progress for probably 2 years. So that is actually on, I was gonna bring it up for future considerations for planning commission, because we will be coming to planning commission with the same presentation for you all to provide your feedback, get the whole lowdown on that at the next meeting in the 23rd. So, and they didn't have a lot of there wasn't a ton of time, so there wasn't a lot of other real substantial feedback on the plan. But I mean, it's a great document. I think it's been worked on extensively to this point where I don't know if there's gonna be much to change. Maybe little tweaks here and there, but yeah, you'll get to learn all about that at the next meeting. That was all.
And are there any department updates?
Yeah, so just wanted to keep everybody aware that we're still hiring our code enforcement officer. We had somebody that we wanted to hire and the offer was basically rejected. So we're kind of back down to, we're leaving the position open for another, at least this week. And then we'll do another round of interviews and hopefully we'll have somebody in that position in the next, month. And then, let's see, what else did I have? Oh, we have our new Vista, Katie. She hails from New York, most recently actually though Spain. She lived in Spain for a couple years and did her study abroad there. And just came to Moab, literally flew on the plane today. Picked her up from the airport and then here she is. So we're excited to have Katie on board. She's gonna be working to take the Moab area affordable housing master plan and taking all the data that was in there and the goals and figuring out a way to set up these dashboard indicators to track our progress on affordable housing as we go forward. So it's going to be really important for her to kind of carry on that work and then also potentially working with the Trails Division in 2024 on an effort to update the non-motorized trails master plan. And that'll be a really fun effort too. So there's gonna be a consultant involved. I believe Maddie's already been kind of thinking about a scope of work for that but their board is very active, so they're gonna be involved. And then I think it'll be a great opportunity for Katie to kind of get hands-on experience with the master plan update. Yeah. Excited to meet everyone. Excited to meet you.
Glad you joined.
Yeah,
Um,
good project.
I don't know, was there something else? I feel like there was one other thing. Well, yes, we went to the conference. Mikkel and I went to the fall APA, American Planning Association, Utah and Idaho chapters combined and they had a conference up in Ogden, which was really great. We learned a lot. So we'll share some of our highlights from that later in the meeting. Yeah, I think that's it for department updates.
Okay, we're gonna open a public hearing. It's a review, to review and make a recommendation to adopt an ordinance approving the overnight accommodation overlay, OAO campground / RV park rezone request for a portion of property located at the intersection of highway, and I think it should be 191 and State Route 313, and it has a parcel number here, 240XST-0067. I think Jenna's gonna give a staff report on it.
Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and just share our parcel map, at least for now. So while I'm kind of reading through the notes and staff report, you get an idea of where the application is, and maybe I'll stop halfway and show a couple of the other images.
You want a mouse? It's hard to do
Okay.
that with that mouse
No,
sometimes.
it's okay.
Okay.
Got it. Thanks though. Okay, so the application is for recommendation and consideration for the OAO district for the parcel that was mentioned by OB. And in the recommendation, I'm sorry?
I think it's background.
Make sure you. Oh, somebody's got YouTube going in the background. There's not. Is YouTube on in the back of your? I think so. See YouTube on in the background. Can you- on the computer?
Oh,
Oh, there it is. Yeah, that was it. That little trick we have to do is close the YouTube.
Okay. Emily, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you just fine. And we didn't hear anything on our end come through Zoom, so I'm not sure what the issue
Yeah,
was.
Quite a rebound, so we're good to go now. All right, so for the OAO, it is considering a recommendation for county commission to approve or disapprove the overnight accommodation overlay for RV and campground for the property in question. When considering an application for the OAO district, the commission is to make some findings of fact in relation to the county's effort to achieve or maintain a balanced ratio of mixed uses in the county, including residential lodging, and commercial uses, and in determining what constitutes a balanced ratio of mixed uses, to consider 3 sets of items: Grand County's ratio of overnight accommodation units to primary residential units, which is currently at 1.5, which is slightly higher than the 2019 baseline of 1.4, according to the table provided in the staff report. Additionally, consider the carrying capacity analysis or additional studies specific to Grand County capacity to support further overnight accommodations. And then also the items listed in considerations of interest. And those include economic diversification, job creation, increased wages, community aesthetics, civic and open space, county infrastructure, such as roads, water, sewer, and stormwater, public services, such as law enforcement, and emergency services, traffic in quantity and circulation, water resources, housing demand, and crowding and congestion. I'm just going to go ahead and read a little bit of the background, and since you see now where the property is, I'll go ahead and
Just
just
that
put
Steve can't
a
hear it.
conceptual drawing.
Are you saying Steve can't hear?
He made that comment earlier. Yeah, we can hear y'all
all
just.
Yeah, I can hear. Thanks.
Great, all thanks. So for the background of the property, the subject property is zoned range and grazing, and it's currently undeveloped and surrounded by BLM land, which is predominantly used for recreation and natural wildlife habitat and resource extraction. This is a request for OAO RV Campground District to be applied to a portion of the property. And it's for the purpose of developing a luxury eco retreat centered on environmentally responsible tourism. The OAO proposal includes a request to rezone 544 acres of the roughly 1,130 acre parcel. The property owner, Intrepid Potash Moab LLC, intends to later subdivide the 1,130 acre parcel, partitioning off the 544 acres, which is the subject of this rezone, and as such, the full area of the property is not included in the request. The OAO development plan includes plans for 16 luxury sites, an activity center, restaurant, bar, and swimming pools, as well as 5 on-site employee housing units as permitted by the land use code, accessory housing units. And the developer estimates the resort will generate up to 50 jobs with much higher pay rate than the present average day wage in Grand County. This application is a resubmission. In 2022, the developer brought forth the proposal and was denied at that time. Commission stating concerns with the relatively high ratio of overnight accommodations to primary dwellings in county, and the development agreement lacking sufficient provisions to ensure deed-restricted employee housing that would offset the development's impact. The commission also cited concerns with the development's impact on the viewshed and the surrounding area being located at the boundary of the Scenic Resource Protection District. At the time, the developer had plans for implementing a conservation easement for a large portion of the property, but the development agreement did not include any mechanism for ensuring the conservation easement would be executed and that the open space would be preserved in perpetuity. The developer has resubmitted the application with a revised development agreement, which includes provisions for on-site and off-site employee housing, as well as deed restricted open space to be preserved in perpetuity. The employee housing proposal brought forth by the developer includes a commitment to construct 15 off-site employee housing units located within Grant County and to be deed restricted for actively employed households per land use code 4.7. The proposal is in addition to a commitment to construct 5 on-site employee housing units as permitted. Both the on-site and off-site employee housing is required to be constructed within 24 months of site plan approval and prior to certificate of occupancies being issued for the project overall. Additionally, the applicant has entered into a deed restricted agreement with the neighboring property, Red Earth Venue. It's a special events venue for the purpose of open space preservation of 104 acres of land surrounding the venue, including a portion of the 313 scenic byway. Because the property owner's intent is to later subdivide that portion of property, which is the subject of this OAO application, the deed restricted area does not include the remainder of the property outside of the development area to the east. I'll go ahead and share with you the master plan as well. Get an idea, you can see the hatched area on the left is where the deed restricted area is intended to be. The
And that-
develop, go ahead.
Oh, well, can I just say
Yeah.
too, because it's confusing at first if you didn't. So the parcel is much larger than that, but so that boundary that you're seeing here is the actual 544 acres that's planned to be subdivided and partitioned off to represent that project, the development project. So yeah, that's the parcel and then that's the 544 acres there.
While we're pausing on this particular point, I actually was hoping staff could get specific and clarify the timing and affected land of these various proposed easements, deed restriction, the neighboring property. I was getting a little bit confused in the packet. So specifically, I'd love to know what part of this property would be deed restricted off the bat if theirs were to be approved by the commission in its current form? How does that relate to the neighboring property? And is there any additional guarantee on this portion of the parcel that is proposed for the conservation easement, but that the conservation easement doesn't or wouldn't currently apply to?
Should I continue through the staff report and then I'm sure we have lots of questions, or do you want to pause and answer here?
Sorry, I just knew that you were talking about this particular deed restricted area. And so if you wouldn't mind just going into a little bit more detail at this point, it would be, I think, helpful in the context of the rest of the staff report.
Well, let's start with question 1. We had a couple questions in there. Let's just kind of piecemeal it off.
I think one of the questions is the UAL land, which my reading of it says that might happen. But that hasn't been kind of formally approved and won't be probably before this goes through. It's not a condition that has to happen for this to go through to allow them to build. But they're in process. And then I think the 100 acres is somehow going to be firm by the time they're allowed to get permits to build or to proceed.
Right, that's right.
Is that roughly right?
Yeah, so the deed restricted, the hatched area here that's proposed for the open space set aside is going to be required to be like recorded as a deed restriction prior to site plan approval. I believe that's the timing of it. So, so it would be set, it would have to happen in order for the project to move forward. The conservation easement is, I probably think that Matt should maybe cover that in his portion of the presentation.
I mean, I can brief this slightly for you as far as the conservation easement. Ultimately, that has to be initiated by the property owner. And Matt is currently not the property owner, and Matt becoming the property owner is contingent upon approval of the application. So in a hypothetical approval of that application, then Matt would initiate that process to get that moving. So the letter from Open Lands was really just kind of general support that they see that it probably won't be a problem, but that can't officially start that process until the person of interest, Matt, and is the property owner and request that. Yeah. All right. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. Let's do this. Okay, so the developer intends to further protect the natural landscape with the deed restricted, within the deed restricted area through a conservation easement. The applicant has included a letter provided by Utah Open Lands Conservation Association, which explains that while the association cannot provide a guarantee of conservation easement until the property owner of record request the initiation of the review. The association does in fact recognize the location as a priority conservation region, as it is nearby other Utah open lands areas, including Moab, Brown Moab Ranch, Professor Valley Ranch, and the various Mountain Island Ranch conserved lands. The development agreement includes language legally binding the developer to such terms of development and defines terms of default for the agreement, which could result in revocation, denial, and suspension of any permit, including a land development permit, conditional use permit, building permit, certificate of occupancy, or any discretional approval. Overall, the applicant has demonstrated that the project largely complies with the OAO district standards, designing an energy efficient luxury eco retreat with no more than 16 sites proposed. Development of camping accommodations will be built within a modest footprint relative to the 544 acres. The applicant will need to provide evidence of a water right sufficient to support the development, as well as preliminary engineering studies to show feasibility of providing the water source and the ability to dispose of wastewater on site. And of course, if an applicant were to be approved for a rezone, they would then also have to do a subsequent site plan application review with the department. So that was the staff report background item. Or you may like to go from here, sir.
We do have the applicant,
Mhm.
and if
Yes.
you, Matt, if you wanted to speak on behalf of your project, I think could that be the time to do that, Opie?
I think it is the time to open it for public comment. And yeah, you could go first and we may just have questions if that's okay, but you may have some things to say also.
Sure, thank you.
If you don't mind coming forward to.
Oh, yeah.
You can sit down, we can pull up a chair.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't have to be super formal.
We just want to make sure that Al captured your words.
Gotcha. Yeah, so well, thank you for having me here. As was mentioned, this is my second time trying to get this done. First time, I believe the planning commission, everybody who was here voted to approve it. At that time in our application, we had said that we were going to put a conservation easement on the front half of the property. After the planning commission hearing, the county attorney at the time decided that we couldn't make the guarantee in that way. And then the application was eventually voted down in the county commission. So we've come back and really, I think, tried to address two issues that I know are important to the county. One is open space preservation, which is why we've not only guaranteed the deed restriction in our development agreement, but we've also created a separate agreement with the neighbor to do it. So we're doubly bound, I guess. And then I know, having grown up not far from here in Fruita, having been visiting Moab for a long time, I know that housing is an issue. And in agreement with my investors, we've agreed to, as was mentioned, build 15 employee housing units, in addition to the 5 employee housing units on site, which are allowed by the county code. So with 16 guest units and 20 employee housing units, I feel like we're not negatively affecting that ratio. That's so important. Beyond that, my background is in African tourism, actually, and I'm involved in developing and operating these types of resorts in Southern Africa. And I believe that they're a really great way for, it's been a great model of tourism in Southern Africa, where it's led to a lot of preservation of open space, wildlife habitat, and a lot of economic development. I think it's a perfect model for a place like Moab that's struggled with figuring out how to balance the benefits of tourism with the negative effects of tourism. You know, it's small scale. We're not talking about a lot of people, but would potentially have a very large economic impact. Our projected nightly rate is $2,000 a night. So we'd have we contribute as much to the transient room tax as a hotel of 200 people is what we estimate. So I feel like it's a good deal. It's something I believe in. That's why back here 2 years later, I've been working on this for 4 years. And yeah, I mean, our goal is to be a, you know, good corporate citizen and a partner of the community and to develop the type of tourism that I think I've seen work very well in other places, and I think it could be a good addition to the local tourism economy.
Any questions?
I had one question about just the way this was written out. And it's because I found conflicting information, and it's kind of a minor thing, but one of the places it said that you would construct the housing for the additional, what was it, 15?
Mhm.
And the other place it said it would be construct or buy, I think. I just wondered which of those is correct.
Well, that's a very good question. I think what we came to in the development agreement is that we would construct new housing. At some point, we were sort of trying to figure out the best way forward, but our commitment is what's in the development agreement, which is to construct new housing.
Okay.
I think we're not really doing much to solve the housing issue if we're just taking existing housing stock and.
If you read my mind, that's what
Yeah.
Okay. That was the only question about the write-up. I had a couple other, for maybe Elisa, but we can save that for when we get into the discussion.
And none on the monitors.
I have a question. That where we want to know. I know this question got asked last time this came through and I was on the commission at that point as well, and the planning commission. I can't remember what the I couldn't find it either, what the answer was, but there's a lot of space on this map that doesn't have any buildings on it, that's not included in like the deed restriction or the conservation plan. So I'm curious, are there plans to further build out in the future? Why isn't that included in the
Yeah,
conservation area?
that's a great question. There's no plans to build out in the future. Sort of the way this model works is, you know, based on a few people with a lot of space. And so that's kind of what we've done. My understanding is, and this could be wrong, that if we wanted to add units or do anything additional, it would require going through this process again. We don't have any plans to develop that area beyond maybe the creation of development of some recreational activities like hiking trails and mountain biking.
Okay.
I have a question, OB, if I can.
Yeah.
Here we go. So looking at the master plan and reading your statement, you note that parking will be between 313 and the development. So I see on the second slide of the conceptual presentation, the arrow pointing in the general direction of traffic, and I'm assuming I'm just not looking in the right place. Could either staff or the applicant orient me to where traffic would be situated, where parking would be situated in relation to this map?
Yeah, it would be that green square right there, right off the highway. I believe, and this is my fault, I believe maybe in the conceptual presentation had been updated to reflect that parking would be there. I think at one point we had thought we would move it closer, further south onto the property. But because the neighbors have a wedding venue that has views to the east of Arches, they asked us to move it. So we did. And then the other benefit of putting it there is that there's a watershed there. And our goal is to develop the property as little as possible, as little as we can get away with, to keep it in its natural state. And we don't want to have guests drive back into the canyon. So our idea would be to have them park on the other side of the watershed, so we don't have to improve that too much. I mean, I know we'll have to create some sort of mechanism to make sure that it's accessible to get across there. But the idea was that we'd have people park and then we'd have as minimally improved road as possible.
Mhm.
and then we shovel them.
Yeah,
So the parking would be within the boundary of the deed restricted space and soon to be conservation easement?
yeah, so in the development agreement, we had to put a few stipulations for uses that would be allowed there, and they, I think they're pretty minimal. One is the parking lot, and then, a few things like utilities that wouldn't, involve building structures, but might be utility boxes or a well for water could happen in there, but no other types of development would be allowed.
Okay. And then, so you note in the site configuration that the units would be placed at the base of the hill and no mass grading would be required, but I also know, again, in your concept, and I don't know the intricacies of this property well, you have them situated, it looks like in a wash. And I guess, just on consultation with an engineer or any sort of flood mitigation consultant, safety, what is the likelihood that there is graded needing to put these properties outside of any flood zone so that your guests can be protected?
That's a good question. We've tried to avoid the direct drainage as much as possible. And I may be wrong about this, but my understanding is that, we'll be following the basic structure of what's outlined here, but that, it's possible that some of the guest units might need to be moved slightly. We have our engineer on here. Paul, do you have any additional thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is Paul Berg with Berg Engineering. I think the tent sites have been placed such that there aren't issues with the wash. The main access road that goes up the trail, it's close to the wash in some locations. Even the Adventure Center, which looks like it's in the middle of the valley, actually sits on a little bit of a knoll and sits quite a bit higher than the bottom of the wash. So we've taken that into account with this plan.
Okay. Yeah, my concern, and this is sort of a larger issue than this individual application, but Paul, you might have some thoughts here. We don't have glamping specific standards. And when somebody were to develop something that was more, a stick frame house, they would have to meet certain standards for floodplain mitigation before they could get, a permission to occupy that unit. And I'm thinking there's a similar glamping development south of town in San Juan County that was pretty severely affected by flooding was it last year or 2 years ago along 191? If you feel comfortable with that, that's fine. I just would note to staff that we might want to take a deeper look at this with the county engineer before going to commission, but thank you for answering my questions.
Has Dan weighed in on this yet through any kind of DRT?
No, I just have
Initial
comments from Dave.
Okay, oh, that's right.
Yeah, and those mentioning the requirement for a rockfall hazard study and potential improvements over the wash area that are anticipated to be a bridge, but as I understand, there could be alternatives to what that would be. So other than that, not in reference to the wash area.
Yeah, you could have, I think that wouldn't hurt to have Dan get eyes on this, just to make sure that there's nothing. Because the sooner we can catch anything that's major, the better, even though we're not at the site plan review stage, but you want to know if there's going to be something down the line that the county engineer would require that's like maybe a deal breaker or something. So we can do that between now and the county commission meeting, just have Dan review, do like an initial review.
I will say that the county engineer looked at this 2 years ago with the original application. Most of his comments related to the creek that's next to the highway. But it is a good idea to look at this wash. There is not a FEMA floodplain in the area. That doesn't mean there couldn't be localized flooding, but again, we've at least kept the tents or the tent sites away from the main wash, but we're open to working with him and just mitigating any potential flood risks.
Other questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we are ready to, do we actually close the public hearing at this point? Okay, we're gonna, no one else out there wants to speak.
What is the message in the chat?
So that's Steve saying he didn't hear anything on his.
Oh, okay, I just saw the new, I just saw the new message thing, that's why I was curious.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Okay, so I'm gonna close this public hearing and then I guess we get to discuss this amongst ourselves.
We have to pass a motion, right? First.
Do we need a
To
We
motion?
need a motion to discuss.
Oh, yes, we need a motion to discuss, yes.
I'm happy to make a motion, OB, to open discussion.
I'll second.
Okay, well, I'll give my specific justifications before we have a second.
She's going to.
Yeah, no, she makes the
Okay, she's
motion,
gonna
then
make
we
the motion,
second, and
Josh
then we
seconded it,
discuss.
And then we can discuss.
So I'm trying to find the right document of the agenda summary. There it is. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit of a long one because we have to give some justification. So I move to recommend that the county commission approve the overnight accommodation overlay campground rezone and associated master plan, an OEO development agreement for Grand County parcel number 24-0xST0067, based on the following findings related to Grand County's effort to achieve or maintain a balanced ratio of mixed uses in the county, including residential, lodging, and commercial uses, and in determining what constitutes a balanced ratio of mixed uses. Okay. So going down this list quickly, regarding sub item A, in terms of balancing the housing ratio, I find that the addition of workforce housing compared to the general impact that this would have on housing demand in Grand County isn't sufficient to raise concern over not making a positive approval recommendation. Knowing that the additional units off the property would be new construction. I don't think we're in a position to comment on the carrying capacity analysis because that hasn't been completed yet. This would increase our TRT tax revenues significantly with a fairly small impact on infrastructure and other financial costs. The high wages that would be offered, I think, are compelling to support our local workforce. I am supportive of the use of on-site employee housing in addition to dedicated employee housing off-site. The impact on the community aesthetics and the overall use of this space appears to be minimal. And I think that this sort of dedicated and minimized use is a more appropriate use of this land than the vested number of houses that could be constructed. And I'll just point out, we did hear a presentation from Sitla a few years ago in the same area where they were proposing high-end luxury housing, single-family units, bringing in water, having swimming pools. And so there's obviously signals of market demand for that type of housing in this region. And I would far rather see a parcel of this size be dedicated to open space and a small number of campsites. There's a long motion. There's my justification.
Okay, now you have.
All right, second.
Try reading that one back, OB. Sorry. Thank goodness we're recording. So in addition to the justification, I don't have many additional comments. I will say, a general concern that I have about any sort of luxury tourism is at $2,000 a night. The first thing I thought is many of the people staying here are likely to fly in on their own jets. I'm really concerned about the climate impact of that. There's nothing this body can do about it. Certainly denying this individual project on that basis wouldn't meet the criteria of our justification but I am concerned about that, and I don't really know how to address that. But I'm also concerned about the use of swimming pools, though I don't know that we can specifically deny that amenity in this type of use. I wish we could. I wish that we had the ability to have distinct design standards for glamping accommodations out in our desert exurbs. I just think to call yourself sustainable and then have a swimming pool is a little bit at odds, but there's that. So if there is a mechanism to deny that amenity, I would recommend that we took that step. And I'm a little nervous about the water rights justification, but we've already heard Dana say that she will offer water. Guess it's not Dana anymore, but that GWISA will offer water for commercial uses, not residential uses, to be trucked in. And if the tap gets shut off, you just sort of know what you're signing up for. So I just want to raise those concerns for discussion, particularly for staff attention. But that's it for my comments.
More comments?
This gives me heartburn just primarily because we're multiple years into glamping becoming popular and still don't have a definition. It feels like we're well overdue, and it feels like we should be approving any of these until we have a definition. Seems like a disservice to our community and to future glamping, developments that want to come in. So I would just request that staff kind of continue to prioritize coming up with a glamping definition. We're only likely going to see more of these in rapid succession the more we approve as well. So it'd be nice to have a definition for this, so we have a little bit more agency. And I share Emily's concerns about the use of water. It is kind of funny that they're, the eco resort, we're really talking it up, but yeah, the use of a pool and various other aspects of this are kind of funny. And I also, we denied I think it was a expansion on that campground that is very nearby. I can't remember who manages it. A couple of years ago, he denied the expansion or build out of a campground very nearby. That feels a little bit, it just feels interesting. Feels like something that we're approving this one, and that we, potentially approving this one and didn't approve that one. Those are my comments.
My thoughts are kind of parallel in many ways. I think the thing about this project that I like is it has done a lot of work trying to give the county something in return for overnight rentals, because we have way too many overnight rentals in comparison to kind of primary housing. But the housing aspect's important. Appreciate that. To the extent that land is put into easements, when I look at the UOL, I guess it is Utah Open Lands, I say, I'm not gonna count that. I'll be very happy if it happens, but it's not written in stone. But the 100 acres seems to be pretty well written in stone. This isn't a great density to be putting on so many acres. That's helpful for me. Yeah, it'd be nice if there weren't swimming pools, or they could be minimized. And I think very, very honest about the water. You're gonna drill, gonna see if you can get water rights, drill and see if you can get water. And if you can't, it will be trucked in, and the trucking in, of course, does have some impacts. But my feeling is they've done enough to let the county commission take a good hard look at this. So I'll probably support it. That's the way I feel now.
Okay. Are we going around?
No, but you can have a turn if you might.
All right. So, I just wanted to point out, and it's kind of what you and Emily alluded to, and that is the ratio of overnight accommodation to primary. Said 1.5 today. This actually is 0.8. So it turns it the other direction, which is a good thing. The other thing that I like is your comment about constructing the 15 other offsite employee housing units. So it again helps address that issue that we have. That's a big investment in the community. The 5 on-site are in a really nice location and would be hard to beat. You know, I think that's something employees would appreciate as well. So all positives. I did have a question about the carrying capacity study that was referenced in here. That is, do we have that planned at any point in the future? Because if we're referencing something that isn't complete or isn't planned, then we really have a hard time holding them accountable to.
That's true, yeah. When we don't have that underway, I think that could be something that we would take on when we go and update the OAO, the GLAMP,
Yeah.
actually define GLAMP grounds, like Maketa is saying, and we had started a draft of this code update to redefine kind of the OAO sections and actually have standards for GLAMP grounds. And I think that it became less of a priority when the housing stuff became.
And I think that's the correct priority, but I think a plan for a plan would be good because like other people said, we're gonna get more requests.
Yeah. For sure.
There is one other thing though I would bring up, which is it's really hard to know what it does to the ratio. I mean, it's the interesting thing. I think you say you're gonna hire 50 people maybe. I don't know how many of those are gonna be people who already live here in the area, or how many people get kind of brought in. So it's really hard to know what happens to, not the ratio, but what happens to housing for folks.
I was thinking about that too, and the wages are higher than the averages here, which means we'll probably see people transition out of other jobs locally into this one. But I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I would also push back on that. I just looked at the wages here. This is one of my next comment is. It says $3,200 for entry-level housekeeping position, which is about $20 an hour. And I just looked up and every place on Indeed is hiring housekeepers for $20 to $21 an hour.
Yeah.
So
I think $25 an hour is 50,000. 25, is that right? No, yeah, it is.
I don't know, I just,
Yeah,
That's 50.
their projection here was $3,200 a month for entry-level
Yeah.
housekeeping, which everywhere else
exactly.
in town is.
It's less than 20.
Well, and that's unique to Bryan County and Moab, right, too, because we do have, just because of our location and the demand for employees, there's kind of a shortage, right? So there is that kind of higher base level wage, I think, in Moab compared to maybe other resort. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm
Contrary
quite
to-
understanding what you're saying,
What's that?
because I was comparing it to other Moab resorts that are hiring right now.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean.
Because they're saying like, oh, we're gonna pay so well, so much like more
Right,
than other
more than,
businesses.
yeah, and I think what I'm trying to just maybe give perspective of is that it might behoove the developers to look at that because
Oh, yeah.
we do have this already high base wage,
Yeah.
more than, other communities, which is kind of, yeah.
The 140 looked pretty good. That was the top of the range.
14,000 for the general manager.
Yeah,
that's
14,000.
pretty sweet,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may, I mean, I think it's, I appreciate that the developer included those numbers, and I do think this is one where the market is going to ultimately push it to where it's going to go, especially as the cost of gas goes up. What's interesting about the location here is that also has the potential not to compete with labor in Grand County as much as units inside of the county, the city boundaries, and actually may provide some wage pressure on Green River as well. So there could be some regional benefit economically there, which is not in our justification list, but will be interesting to watch.
So I had two
Yeah.
more,
Okay.
so if I could just.
You mean we're gonna let you finish?
Sorry, Drew.
I hope so.
Sorry.
One was on Exhibit B, page 28. It said in there that the maximum allowed by county regs is 5 employees,
Employee housing unit.
On here, yeah.
employee housing units. And so, yeah, that, I found that a little bit surprising that we would actually limit that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been
Gary, would
discussion.
you repeat where that was? I'm looking at Exhibit B, but I couldn't hear where on the document.
Exhibit B on page 28. And that's the PDF page. I don't know if it's the actual page.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was kind of said, thinking of people who, let's say, run a river running place and have a place on Main Street, and how many could they accommodate? But there, of course, other places like, I think it's Sherry Griffiths or something, where there's actually a lot of land. So it's interesting that it is limited.
Yeah. Did you find that, Emily?
No, we, in the digital version, all of the exhibits are separated. So in Exhibit B, which page is it on?
Go to page 28 on the digital version, the 28th page. If you look at the right side of the PDF Adobe, it has 81 pages.
It's all good. I'm looking at the version that was listed on the Agenda Center, so they're all broken out. Let me pull that other one up then.
Would it be helpful just to see that section of the land use code shared?
Sure, that would be great, actually. Thank you.
Might be able to do control in the plus sign to zoom in.
I didn't intend to take this much time, movie.
This is good. This is fine.
It's an important piece.
Yes,
Doesn't affect this one, but
yeah, it's important for the future. That you could do it on through where putting.
yeah,
We had talked about at one of our meetings when we were looking at this section for updating the land use code, actually modifying that requirement to tie to the parcel size, so we could have more accessory employee housing based on the parcel size. I don't think that, it didn't make it
and
through the final version.
listen, Elisa, my concern here is if we have someone like these people here who would most likely have had additional employee housing if it were allowed,
Mhm.
they'd probably do it.
Right.
So why not let them do it? In this case, they have plenty of room to do it, and it looks like, I mean, if they're doing it in keeping with what they have here, it'd be done in a tasteful manner.
Mhm.
Why not let them do it? So the reason I made that comment is just so that we can make a note and work on this at some other time, but just identified as an opportunity for improvement in the code. And then I had one more thing. And that is, we had a list here. Sorry, Obi, I'm being.
This is just fine.
Okay.
We have time.
In item C, we were talking on the agenda, talked about the considerations of interest. And I would add this as a consideration, and that is, there's noted in here that properties currently zoned range and grazing allows for the development of one residential home site per acre and a variety of commercial uses. And I would just point out that in my mind, this is a much better use of the land than what it's currently zoned for.
Mhm.
I think, Emily, you made a comment in that regard. But in any case, I think some kind of a text like that would be helpful for the county, although they probably recognize that pretty quickly too.
That's good.
And, Makeda, I respect what you're saying too, but I think on the other hand, compared to what this could be, it's far preferred in my mind.
Oh, and I don't have a problem with development. I was just pointing, there's just a couple things that seem like
Yeah.
a little bit
With the context,
overplayed, is
to
all I
the
was saying. I think
glamping and-
a little overplayed on certain things, but
I agree with you.
that's all I was saying.
completely.
As far as the
Yeah, we-
wages, I'm like, it's not really that much better than the rest of them, but yeah.
And I agree, we need to prioritize the glamping.
I'm not like down with this development at all. I'm just pointing out a few things that seem a little bit overemphasized in their application.
That was it.
Wow, can I make a motion?
Oh, the motion was already
Motion
made.
is-
I thought we could amend them and put a counter
Oh,
motion.
amend the
Oh,
motion.
man.
Well,
Yeah.
I moved to amend to disprove this overlay.
So that would be an alternative motion. So I
yeah,
moved to
so-
make an alternative.
I'll make an alternative motion. The considerations of interest on this
economic diversification. We're all, of us here, who thinks that building another hotel is an economic diversification in Grant County? I mean, this land is owned by Intrepid Potash. I'd personally rather see a mine go in with like union paying jobs that paid more than like minimum wage Moab that can barely pay for housing. So that's one of my things. It's like you get one good job out of this, and what I've seen with these kind of hotel outfits is they usually take that good paying job and hire somebody from outside and they bring them in. You know, the community aesthetics. I'm kind of like, do we just really want to attract this type of tourism? I mean, we're attracting a billionaire class that I don't really think that like we want to have to Moab. The Kardashians, I've seen other advertisements that this company has put out boasting about billionaire class. I don't really think that that's the aesthetic that I want to push. And then I just think that the housing, it's like you're providing 20 units out of 50. Like, yeah, that's a good start, but you're not paying wages to pay for ownership of other houses or even possible rental of housing in this area. It's like, okay, you got a poverty wage for this area for 30 more spots. So that puts more pressure on this kind of lower end of the economy. Maybe it spurs some kind of demand for it, but I think there's these counter arguments would be a good thing to think about. I mean, you know, I don't think any Moab citizens really think like, oh yeah, great, more hotels. Like, we want good paying jobs that in economic diversification, and this like goes contrary to that. No seconds.
Well, I'm trying to
Well, it
figure out
wasn't
what-
really, it's not really a motion, but I think you've made arguments against the motion that's on the
No,
floor.
I heard him make an alternative motion, so if there is a second, we would have to vote on it before we could come back to the original.
Yeah, I don't think there's, but I don't actually think there was yet a motion there. There were arguments that maybe you want to make a motion that we turn this down or something.
Could we clarify where we're at actually?
We can continue to, we can continue.
There was a motion made to accept, but if the motion fails, then it's turned down. So I don't know if we need a motion to.
Well, we have a thing to either approve it or disapprove it.
And
Yeah.
so I guess that I'd just like to ask Aaron, do we need to make the motion or do you want to,
I made my point.
okay?
Well, I mean, point of order, Aaron, if you want to, I mean, if there's no second, I think we're in a different situation, but if there is a second, I think it's worth considering your motion. I think you made some decent points that at least should be captured in the record in subsequent discussion.
So yeah, I will make that motion of disapproval.
Yeah, and his justification was based on the criteria about economic diversification, so I think.
So your motion was to disapprove,
Yes.
Correct.
and that's, is that a
Alternative motion.
alternative motion?
So we vote on this one.
And we
if
vote
it's
on this
second,
one
and
first?
then-
Well, if there's a second though.
Right.
We have to have
Need
a
a
second
second.
and then.
Yeah.
And then what happens to the other motion?
and
If
then-
the
Then it's-
alternative motion passes, then the other motion is lost. If the alternative motion fails, then we go back and we vote on the original motion unless another alternative or amended motion is put on the table.
Did you just second his motion?
I did not second. I had a separate comment. I can lower my hand that I can hold to make. So,
Is there a second to that?
I'll
motion?
second.
Okay. Discussion of this alternative motion. I'm only gonna say I've got much sympathy with the idea that do I morally think it's great to have a place that has, $2,000 or $3,000 a night, amenities, etc. I'd probably say, it's hard for me just to conceive of it, etc. My reason for not being for this motion has to do with the positive parts of this proposal, and that has to do. Yeah, one could argue, if Intrepid would keep it and not do anything, they don't have to do any mining, just keep it, that'd be fine. But they've got a piece of range and grazing land that's valuable, that's likely to get developed at some time. This development, although I may not like these large tents and stuff as a development, is kind of minimal on the land. And it is that and the locking up of some of the land that probably most interests me in this project. It's the reason I supported something like this, whatever it was a year or two ago, was, small number of units, placed back out of the view shed, looked a lot like what we were doing in our small area plan for this area. So that's my reason that I'll probably vote against your motion. But not that you didn't make some good points in it.
May I chime in with a question for staff? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And I still have that other question I want to come back to, but I'll save that one until after the discussion is closed. Lisa, given that this is a legislative decision that the county commission would be making, what is the discretion that the county commission has to require a certain number of units of employee housing proportionate to the number of expected jobs, or some percentage of those jobs that are likely to be filled by existing Grand County residents?
Well, the problem with this is that we don't currently have any requirement like that in our land use code for the OAO RV campground. So really, I don't think the commission would be in a place to propose a number like that. That would probably get into the quid pro quo type of scenario that we need to avoid at all times. So I think that's why, you know, this is the developer coming with a proposal in their development agreement, and that's legally okay. But once we start saying, hey, we want to do more, can you go back and change things? I think that's where we might have legal problems with that.
But they could use the lack of housing as a justification for denying this overlay.
Mhm.
So related to that, and I don't know what the appropriate motion would be to send forward if there is support of this from the Planning Commission. We now are going on multiple years where we have acknowledged that glamping is a distinct use, and this luxury glamping is much closer in form to hotels than to campgrounds. And we have assured housing for hotels. We'd never applied it to campgrounds, coulda, shoulda, woulda back in 2017 or whatever that was. And as recently as a few years ago, the county commission made a decision to table any applications, in that case related to development in the small area of 313 and 191, to save time within a very constrained period of time to develop a small area plan that could guide decision-making, because they didn't have the proper planning, long-term planning, in order to make a decision of that on an individual application. And I just wonder, is this the catalyst to recommend that the county commission table this application for a 6-month period, during which time staff would update the land use code to consider our glamping standards? We already have the housing study well underway, so we could look at that against our assured housing ordinance as it currently applies to hotels, determine if changes need to be made there, and then come back to this and consider, its impact. I realize there's issues there of backwards compatibility, so maybe there's some administrative pieces I'm not considering, but it sounds like this developer is coming to the table wanting to work with the county, and the county has been talking about this need for a while. We haven't acted on it, and I just can't square the circle of, I think Aaron raised a really great point. The number of jobs being proposed exceeds the number of housing units being proposed, and therefore this is a strain on our local economy, despite its other positive attributes.
Mhm.
Is there an action there? Is there anything there? I mean, we can't table it here. But
I think it should be part of your recommendation, I suppose. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to kind of include that and forward it to the commission that way.
Okay.
as like a side note kind of thing.
So the last comment I'll make then is, Aaron, to your motion, the reason I'm going to vote against it is not because I don't think you raised some really excellent points. It's because given the limited ability we have to influence decision-making at the county commission level, I would rather send a positive recommendation forward with very, very strong recommended actions connected to it than to recommend a denial altogether, in which case I think it's more difficult for us to justify changes we would recommend should it be passed. And so that's my justification, but I think that your points are really well raised and I'd like to see them addressed in the time period between now and when it goes to the commission.
Any other discussion on this alternative motion?
I don't want to keep belaboring this too long, but I am just curious, like what, because Avi, you mentioned that you want to see this property locked up. In this way, because it seems like a generally like beneficial use overall, and I'm curious what other, because it's range and grazing, and I'm looking at the table of permitted uses, like what other uses you could imagine this, I don't want to get too far into this, but I'm just curious, like what alternative things are you?
Well, I think
Ready to
you can
potentially
put
happen?
one house per 5 acres.
It's one
Yeah.
house per acre.
And I don't believe so, per 5, I believe.
I think range.
It may be wrong, but one per 5 acre, you know, so there's a lot of acreage there, 500 acres, not all of it's buildable on. Typical thing might be to do a PUD and say, well, we'll save this acreage here and we'll have this density of 100 houses. Or maybe there's only 300 you could develop, and so you could have whatever, 300 acres and 5 or
60.
yeah, 61 acre houses, if you will. And they could be whatever the builder wants to build. Well, they have to follow our things, but they could have swimming pools, they could be pretty massive, etc. So this looks to me like a relatively non-dense development that leaves a lot of land open, which is probably the thing I like most about this particular project. I'm also shocked by the price and the luxury. So.
Aaron,
but
the
I think they could do
planning-
that residentially.
The concept plan put forward by Sitla for a similar parcel on the eastern side of 191 a few years ago included private airplane hangars for each house. We're talking about a different class of development to be able to develop in this area just by nature of the infrastructure challenges. And again, that alone doesn't justify this. It's just from a planning perspective, I don't know that there's much we can do at the application to change that.
Currently got Sitla going after several hundred units in Castle Valley
I know,
with glamping.
and they're planning tents, indeed.
Yeah.
It's a different place. They seem to think they want 70 tents up there. They're far away from fire departments, etc. This is a funny thing, but this corridor is, I think when we planned, is the kind of development, not the price of development, that was out of sight, protected the view shed. That the planning commission kind of forwarded to the county commission for that area, but.
Okay, last thing I'll say is
There it is.
I just will say is that our community has voiced that they don't want any more overnight rentals, and that this is an overnight rental that we have a say in, so that's my last comment.
I would say about your water concern, it's like they've agreed to do water for commercial uses, but not residential.
Mhm.
So if this was a residential built by right, like you're not gonna be putting 100 houses in,
Mhm.
so.
Unless,
housing.
of course, you can get water rights from UDWR
There's.
and there's water there. I mean, I don't know that there's water there, but if there were.
Right.
Aaron, just one more comment I got on economic diversification, and that is, there's mining, for example, are higher wages. But if we had for example, I think I brought this up before, if we had a lithium mine come into the area, which there are people exploring for that now, right? They're gonna have higher wages, but we already have pressure on housing. And if we had a large influx of higher wages come in, we'd only see housing prices go up. So I guess what I'm saying from an economic standpoint is we have what we have today, which is a tourism-based economy for what's good, you know, for better or for worse, that's what we have. And even higher wage jobs, depending on how they come in, have their pros and cons also. So there's really no perfect solution here.
And Kate, I wanted to also say, I agree, I think people in general don't want overnight rentals in general. There's this, the only reason for any support for this from me is the putting away of land from development, and not a very dense development, but they are overnight rentals.
Steve.
I'll weigh in with a few thoughts here. I really truly think everybody has brought up really valid points. And I'll just share that I'm really separating my personal feelings from kind of what I think is best given the landscape of our community and being in the state of Utah. I would, at this point, I would be looking to pass along a favorable recommendation to the commission. The point being, you know, I was appointed to this board or this committee, sorry, for commission, whatever we are. I was for economic diversification. And I do see this as economic diversification because it is dealing with a different class of tourists that when markets go down, when the economy feels the strains, this is going to be the type of person that isn't going to be as impacted. And frankly, I don't see Grand County acting in ways that is actually going to diversify our economy. It seems like we've just doubled down on tourism and we need to diversify that sector as much as we can. You know, case in point being mining. I think if Intrepid wanted to mine here, I think there'd be a ton of local opposition. I mean, we see it time and time again. We say we want economic diversification, but then we fight everything that is going to do that. And so I do see this as a way to diversify just ever so slightly our economy. I also think, I mean, I agree with Aaron's points about, you know, the types of jobs I would like to see here. And I think, you know, if Intrepid had any prospects, and I know mining was just an example, perhaps there's another use. I can't really think of any, but if that was a prospect, maybe they'd be looking to do that rather than getting rid of the property. I think to describe how I'm hearing OB's justification is, it is kind of like the lesser of two evils. And sorry, Matt, I think it was your name, the applicant. I don't mean to say implying that you or you know who you're involved with are evil. Just that I think the expression comes to mind. It's not my intention at all there. Two other points I want to make. The second to last one here. I think we need to send a message as a community that says when we have, you know, a developer come in and we say, no, here's where we're drawing a line in the sand, and they go and they follow those things, that we need to follow through. I think I worry that these overlays are this pseudo legal way to say no to everything. And that to me is not right. And I worry about our decision-making sovereignty in the state of Utah. If we say no to everything via this legal justification of the overlay, which makes a legislative process. And it just is that just a cloak to say no to everything? So I think it's a give and take there. And given that they have worked with local businesses and neighbors there to find something that's amicable for everybody, I think we have a developer here that's saying, hey, I'm willing to listen to what you want as a community. You know, if we're just going to say no to everything, let's double down and say it, but that's not what I'm willing to do. And the last thing I'll end with, and this is just directly to the applicant. I would just ask that in this process, if you could get into, if this is passed and y'all move forward, that you get in touch with some wildlife biologists for bighorns, especially. I saw on your plat map there some trails that go up kind of into the rim and the higher country there, and just bighorn sheep. I don't know if they're deemed critically endangered. In my view, they're critically endangered as we have these island species. And for better or worse, I've seen bighorns down in that area close to the highway and Gemini bridges. I haven't seen them there for probably close to 10 years. So I don't know if that's a really good sign or it might be a really bad sign. So anyways, just doing some due diligence on how we can minimize the impact for our, some of the reasons why people come to these areas. So I'll close it there.
Okay, any other discussion? Are we ready to vote? We're voting on the alternative motion, which would be to send an unfavorable recommendation not to proceed with this development. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
1, 2, anybody else? All against that motion?
Aye. Or against.
Yeah, and so that's 4-2.
OB, before we continue to the original motion, I would like to offer a amendment to that motion quickly. So are you okay with that right now?
That's fine.
Okay, I move to amend my original motion to first recommend that the county commission consider tabling this item for a period of time not to exceed 9 months in order to revisit our land use code, define glamping as a distinct use, and consider the appropriate use of assured housing for that use. And if they choose not to go that route, then to fall back to the original motion that I made.
Is there a second for that?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded. Any discussion on that motion?
No long discussion on my part. I'll just say that there is precedent of the county doing this once before, and it has allowed the county to make decisions on this particular type of use, actually, which even, further accentuates that precedent in order to make sure that we're making the right decision in a future friendly way with all the information we have, especially given that we've known this is an outstanding gap in our land use code.
So I have just one question from a procedural standpoint, or maybe just a logistical standpoint, and that is, Lisa, if we were gonna actually take on the glamping, is that something we could do in 9 months?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a reasonable number. Could it be
It's
done? in
reasonable. I
months?
mean, it can get done. It just means that other things might be
Yeah.
slightly delayed.
But I guess that's, from your perspective, is that a reasonable workload to drop on your desk?
I think it wouldn't be a huge lift for our department at this point. We're getting staffed up. I think I already started a draft a while back, and then it kind of got put on hold. Not from our standpoint, but from the commission. So I could pick that back up and move forward. I think 9 months is reasonable.
And no loss in future land use.
Well,
So I think that should be the priority, right? We've
It
been
is,
working on
yeah.
that a long time, and there are other people waiting for
mhm.
the output of that.
I mean, I think it will have a slight impact on that timeline.
But
I just-
not major.
Mhm.
Then I guess, Emily, the question I would have for you in making that motion is, how would you see this play out? For example, would this go to council and then they would approve contingent on meeting the requirements of the future glamping?
No, so what they would be doing is they'd be pausing any consideration of this application to look at the overall appropriateness of this against some future planning for this use. So they couldn't go back and require that I mean, Elisa, correct me if I'm wrong. If they updated the land use code, they couldn't apply those updates to hold the applicant accountable. But what they could say is, we think that this application is so far out of the bounds of what we think is appropriate that we are not going to make the legislative decision to approve it. And the reason I have for including this, our ability to stall for planning is moot. We don't have that, but I do think that the commission would be wise to consider that as a possibility before they consider the application on the table itself. That's why I would order it in that way, but it would be up to the commission how they would choose to act on that.
So let me get also clear, I think. Are you suggesting that if we were to pass this motion, the recommendation for the county commission would be to table this proposal and consider having a glamping ordinance?
My
Or-
amendment was to add language before sharing the positive recommendation to first recommend tabling of this until that plan could happen. And if they chose not to table it, then to fall back to our recommended motion. So I'm
so-
encouraging them to hit pause, and if they don't hit pause, I'm encouraging them to follow my justification for what to do next.
Okay, so let's say we pass this and we're going to do a vote on having a new motion, which looks like this. We suggest you table this, but we like this project. Is that what we're talking about?
So we would vote on this amendment. If the amendment passes, then the motion that we would vote on is to send a positive recommendation, but to first consider tabling this until a plan can be generated for glamping.
So that is the alternative motion is best. We have it, we're gonna count on you if this passes to be able to say that later on.
Perfect.
I have one question for clarification here, though. So let's say, you know, the plan we just hatched, we followed through on that, and then the county develops definitions and criteria guidelines of glamping, and that is radically different than what the applicant has proposed here. Sorry, clarify for me then what happens?
The county has legislative discretion over this overnight accommodations overlay. So they can deny using the justification in place. And I think honestly, there's probably sufficient justification to deny based on what Aaron has raised. They are not obligated. This is because it's a legislative decision. They're not obligated to approve this with conditions. They get to decide whether or not to apply the overlay. And so if they were to update the land use code and then come back to this application and say, you know what, this just doesn't make sense given our future goals for the county, they could deny it on the basis of that. The applicant would be able to resubmit and update their application to meet any of the planning. And honestly, like my just purely subjective opinion is I think this applicant has shown a lot of effort to work with the county. And I don't imagine that the county would go much further than when the applicant is, but we would give us the discretion to be more intentional about things like housing and also some of the issues that were raised in the discussion in the proposed alternative motion. Did that answer your question, Steve?
It did. And I guess I'll just share that I'm thinking, you know, what if this applicant has done all the things that we've asked them to do and, you know, been a kind of a good player, why not approve and then also put the pressure on to define? I guess I just share that of, you know, how, you know, I've had the perspective of somebody just feeling absolutely burned by the county, and it's like, yeah. So I don't know. I guess I'm empathetic to that.
I completely understand that. And I can mentally get to exactly what you're describing. Here's the difference for me. The experience of somebody trying to build housing and being stopped for administrative reasons, to me, is a different circumstance than somebody who's trying to build luxury overnight accommodations at a time when we haven't addressed the ratio of overnight accommodations to housing, at a time where housing has only increased in price since the last time this came before the commission. And when we've been discussing this in public meetings for years, the lack of restrictions around glamping that are more appropriate to use, the concerns about wages and the disparity of wages to the uses that people are coming in and giving to the businesses who are setting up shop in our county, the lack of affordable housing and workforce housing keeping pace with any sorts of the business development. None of this has been happening behind closed doors. It's all been in public meetings, in our newspapers, on our radio. So I guess for me, I just would not have the same degree of, I think it's different in my mind, because I also know in your case, you have been through the ringer. They're different uses, they're different impacts, they're different audiences. They're different to me.
Any other discussion?
I do have one other, and that is, I guess that when I looked at this initially, I thought, okay, this applicant was given some criteria to comply with before they come back to the planning commission or the council. And it appeared to me that they've complied with that criteria. And so my concern is, are we changing the goal line now? That's one concern. And I think that's kind of what you're leading to, right, Stephen? From an ethics, maybe not, but from a standpoint of making clear expectations, that's a concern that I would have. And then Emily, I agree with you completely about the housing costs and the availability of housing here. But I mean, on the other hand, it's challenging to buy a house anywhere today. And if I was starting in my career and looking for land, I can tell you, we were talking about that before the meeting started. 40 years ago, I bought my first house in Denver. I paid $80,000 for it. And it was relatively affordable. It was cheaper than renting. You can't do that today, I'd say anywhere in the US. It's more than just a Moab problem. I don't know how to solve it in Moab. I don't know how to solve it anywhere, but it's just a hard thing to overcome. I wish we could solve it here, but I don't know how to do that.
So I also share that concern, and it's incredibly demoralizing. And I know all of us are frustrated by that. Last thing I'll say here is, in offering this as a alternative path, it gives the applicant the opportunity that the county commission doesn't outright deny this project, but instead tables it to make sure that it actually complies with the future planning and goals of the county as set out by the county commission and their strategy. So it doesn't, nothing we would do with this added amendment would necessarily change the overall likelihood of this passing. I think it does potentially change the likelihood that it doesn't get outright dismissed. So I do think that that's worth considering. And again, just coming back to the comment around like changing the goalposts, I understand that. And I do think that it's important that the county not set unnecessary burdens or unattainable requirements on developers. But I think in this particular case, we have a use that is going to be extremely lucrative for the builder, which in of itself doesn't factor into planning. But I think to me shows that the marginal efforts of adding additional housing could be justified. The housing crisis locally has compounded in the time since those goalposts were originally sent. And I think it's appropriate to expect that even what maybe we thought was the right solution wasn't, because of how bad it's gotten in the meantime. I'd like to see the county be open to working with developers to make projects like this work if it's appropriate. But I also think we need to be very realistic about the severity of our current crisis and where the county has legislative power, which is sort of, there's not that many places anymore. I do think it's up to the county to be responsible and to use it to make sure we're ultimately making the best decisions on behalf of our residents and not just our guests and visitors.
Any more discussion? Okay, we're ready to vote. Can you restate the motion roughly?
Yes. So this is a motion to amend my original motion to first recommend that the county commission table this item for a period of no longer than 9 months, during which they will update our land use code to better define glamping as a use and consider assured housing against that use, and to otherwise continue with the original motion if that move to table fails.
Okay. We're ready to vote. How many are in favor of this amended motion? 1, 2, 3. And how many are opposed?
I'll abstain this one.
I'll abstain also. Now, this, I think, you, and do help me with Robert's rules
Have
here.
to have 4 in favor for the motion.
But probably that's to pass a recommendation, or do you think it's to,
And
yeah, I think it's,
The amendment to the motion.
you think would you agree with me that
We-
this probably is okay for the amended motion, it's okay just to have a plurality in favor?
So this is it's just a like administrative task within the
Yeah.
boundaries of our public meeting. So as long as a simple majority adds the
Yeah.
amendment, then it would carry.
Yep. Okay, so we're now back to
The original.
the original motion, which actually does this now, that was just to amend the original motion. Now we are ready to have a discussion basically on the motion that just passed. That is, that we're going to suggest tabling. But if they don't table it, suggest that this is an okay project to go ahead with.
So let me restate now the amended motion on the table, and we're really putting Robert's rules through the ringer, so I appreciate everyone on this one. I'm going to simplify a little bit and just reference the packet. But we have an amended motion on the table to send a recommendation to table this item based off of the justification giving in the discussion just passed. And should that not happen, to to send a favorable recommendation to approve the overnight accommodation overlay campground rezone, et cetera, on the justification that I'm just going to say was captured thoroughly by staff in the conversation earlier.
And so that really basically tells them, we're suggesting you table it, but if you don't table it, this
To
is a
pass
good,
it with these considerations.
yeah,
And that's
got it.
all one motion.
All one motion.
Done. Now we can vote on that?
We can discuss it if anybody has anything more
I'd
to
like-
say.
Wait,
Yeah, I'll
that's not the
say
motion
on
we
that.
just voted on.
Is that not what you just voted on?
That's what we just voted on.
Yeah, it is, but since it was to amend the motion,
The
the motion is
now-
now
Oh
been
my God,
amended, and
okay.
now we get
Oh
to
my
Now we
God.
get
vote on
talk
the
about
amended
original.
motion.
Oh my
With
God,
the
okay.
amendment.
All
Right.
those ninth grade civics classes are finally paying off, y'all.
Okay.
Great.
So now we can discuss if anybody has anything more to say about the motion that's on the table, which is now the amended motion, the motion as amended.
I put in my 2 cents that we're going to back up our staff for figuring out this land use code that serves locals. And helps with affordable housing, put the brakes on that to put time towards figuring out this, that I'm just not in favor of that.
So I got a question about the possible outcomes here. So if we look at all the possible outcomes, let's just make sure that each of those heads down a path that we're totally okay with, right? One of them would be the county commission basically says, well, we're gonna ignore your recommendation to hold for 9 months, and then they're either gonna approve or not approve.
Yep.
So that would be one. Actually, that'd be 2 different outcomes, either approve or not approve.
Right.
The other one would be, okay, we're gonna accept your recommendation to hold for 9 months. That's where I get confused. What happens if after 9 months, we don't have the standard?
Then they
Then
untable
it's-
the
Then automatically goes to the county, along with our recommendation to approve.
I think so.
All right, then let's say that we do get the glamping code updated and complete. Do we then take a look at this project as compared to that new code?
It's already come through us, so the applicant can either go into front of the county commission and make their case there, or they can choose to resubmit their application. And that would be up to the applicant based on the outcome of that.
But then I guess my question, Emily, would be, would the county commission then look at this application as compared to the new glamping code?
Hmm.
That's what we're asking them to do.
Right.
And if it meets, well, they could go either way at that point. I guess at that point, the applicant could come back to us, say, hey, it's compliant or it's not, we'll make some changes or we won't, and then they could go back through this process again.
And again, we have precedent of this 2 years ago. With a overnight accommodations overlay at 191 and 313, but in that case, we didn't have the small area plan. And it was a traditional RV use, not specifically a glamping use.
Any other discussion? Okay, we are ready to vote on the motion. All in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? It passes 4, 1 abstention and 1 no.
Very nice.
May I jump in really quick with that question I wanted to come back to that I promise won't be a long derailment? It's very small. Regardless, OB, are you okay with that?
Yes, absolutely. I was just going back to make sure where we are in the agenda. Yes, indeed. Give me some time.
Well, I promise it won't take long. No, my only comment would be regardless of what happens at the county commission level, I certainly do appreciate that the applicant was willing to come back forward and take the amount of effort that they did to update their application. Regardless of what happens, we are going to come back and we're going to look at our glamping standards. And if we're able to do that quickly, I would love for the applicant to be involved in that process and even ask the applicant if they would be willing to consider retrofitting their development if it passes to meet those standards, or guiding us to standards that are reasonable. We've recently gone through this process for a different type of development where we had developers involved, and then we ended up with a really healthy update to our land use code as a result of that partnership. And I would be grateful if you would be open to helping us make our land use code stronger. So that was all I wanted to say. I think there's an opportunity here.
We would love to help make the land use code stronger and would definitely consider applying what we're doing to the new standards.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. I know that sitting at the table while that conversation continues is, I'm surely quite the experience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, then we have a few discussion items. Highlights from what we learned at the APA Utah Idaho Chapter Conference.
You want to get one first, or no, let's see, whatever you, I need to actually get on and share my screen. Do you mind taking the?
No.
Sorry.
So a couple of the processes that I sat through at the APA conference were updating your ordinances and process, the options you may not know you have, which was really educational about, because we're trying to do all of these land use code updates. I also sat through what county reporters want planners to know and planning cities in ag country, and those are very eye-opening and educational opportunities as well. The two that spoke to me the most were called Handle with Care, Planning Commission Meeting Management, where we talked about Robert's rules and making sure that commissioners know them and know how their meetings work. And I have printed a QR code out if you guys want to hit that with your phones on the way out. That will take you to the Land Use Academy of Utah. It's got a bunch of helpful videos about your powers and duties and how all of that works. That came from a class called Everything a Planning Commissioner Needs to Know. Also, they reminded about everyone needing to take the state auditor's class called Open and Public Meetings Act training. So if you haven't done that yet, this would be your call to action to do that. So,
You have a QR code for that, too?
no, but I can send you a link
That'd be
if
great.
you would like.
Yeah, can we get the links for both of those? I'm not sure what the QR code is. I don't know if that's in person.
I can do that.
That's great. And an update on the land use elements of the general
Well,
plan.
I just want to cover,
Yeah.
one of the
Oh.
highlights for me at the conference was I attended the water-wise landscaping session. So they had a couple of different panelists. One of the most compelling was the one from Nampa, Idaho. They actually won an award for their landscaping ordinance that they had just done. They did a really amazing public process. They do have a very serious drought issue in that area, and so they were smart enough to put together this drought task force. I think we have already a lot of water kind of groups like the MOP and things happening already in Grand County that it would be redundant to put together like a task force like this, because I think we kind of have our people in place already. But I really like the idea that they went ahead and did this, and with a very focused intention to address their water issues. And so they put together all of these different sort of public, user-friendly kind of things that they should have said through the presentation. This is all stuff that's on their website. And in the end, they came up with looked like a really great example or model kind of water-wise landscape guidelines. So I put this in our folder, our working folder for our landscaping ordinance that we're working on, and we're gonna be referencing this and taking some cues. But there's a lot. It was a very extensive land use code update for their landscaping section. Anyway, so that was really informational, educational. I also attended one session on form-based codes and actually implementing those in 2 different areas up in Weber County, and then one was also in the Ogden Valley. And they were kind of 2 different scenarios where one of them was not a success, and they're struggling to implement their form-based code, but the other one was in the county, and it's very similar kind of situations that I felt like we could compare with our little valley and where they were planning for this part of their unincorporated area. And so I pulled some examples from that presentation as well to kind of apply. It got me really thinking about our future land use planning efforts, and what they were really successful doing is really focusing on their streetscapes in terms of creating their form-based code for their future land use
On their vote.
streetscapes.
Oh, okay.
So really figuring out so we've identified our nodes, right? Like Spanish Trail Road and Mill Creek. And so far, we've been talking about all of the land uses in the land, right? But not necessarily focusing on the street. And so that's where I'm kind of wanting to now bring that aspect into the plan and think about our streetscapes and how those would actually look in relation to the built forms that we're talking about through the land use designations. So, yeah, so that was the other one I really felt.
Lisa, you mentioned the place where they didn't seem to work well. They didn't have a success, and a lot of
Yeah.
times you can learn more from that than the
Yes.
successes, right? Was there anything there that struck you?
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was implement form-based code, like this really kind of aggressive vision for this downtown corridor and this cute character Main Street, which they just didn't have at all. They didn't have anything to start with. And so it was kind of this problem of getting some of those uses to actually establish themselves in order to really get it going. We kind of have some of that apprehension in some of the decisions that are made right now. Well, I guess a lot of the rezone applications that we're looking at right now are kind of, we're trepidatious to approve because we don't have our comprehensive plan done yet. But I think there's going to be definitely some lessons to be learned in terms of, you have to kind of take that visionary risk sometimes and approve something that might not fit in the actual character of the community as it is today, but that you're thinking about 10, 20 years down the road and kind of starting to plant the seeds for that for those land uses to start taking trend, you know. So, yeah, very interesting. And that's a good segue actually to my future land use plan status update. I did want to share with you, I finally did get the original. I've been showing this to everybody. It's really fun. The 1968 master plan for Grand County. I found it while we were moving offices. And we're gonna have it up in our office. I'm gonna get it framed. It's really cool. You can't really see too much of the text with the, on the screen here. But it's got this really cool retro, 1960s artwork. And
that must be snow on the arch, huh? Looks like snow in the background.
possibly, yeah.
It looks that way, how do you know?
Yeah, it's kind of billowy, yeah. But it's really cool. They really put a lot of effort into this back in the late
Projected
60s.
employment, look
And
at
it was,
that.
projected out for 20 or so, well, just under 20 years, so it was like the 1985 plan. So I have this in our
Wow.
office. if you
We've
ever
blown
wanna-
through those, haven't we?
I'll send it out to everybody.
Wow,
That's very nice.
Yeah,
But yeah, some of the land uses here is like, high mountain land and, but one of the things that I found interesting is there was a neighborhood commercial area. And so that's something that has already been talked about back this long ago for the valley, Yeah, so it's very interesting.
It's an adorable map.
Isn't
it is.
So cute.
So the 1960s, I guess that was hand drawn.
Probably so.
All of those gradient lines.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, I'll send this out to y'all so you
Yeah,
can
that'd
take a closer look for sure.
Is that kind of like their equivalent of future land use?
Yes, it was definitely, I mean, a
Do we
future
have-
land use plan can be called a master plan. It
Okay,
can
that's
be
what I
called
figured.
different things, but
Okay,
yeah. Mhm.
our last one was done 10 years ago.
Right, in 2012, yeah. So I'm at the stage now where I just wanted to kind of give you guys the update on where I'm at working on all this. So, we've gone through a lot of public process, a lot of public input we've gathered, we've done a lot of research and data analysis. I'm at the phase now where I want to finalize get the map completely finalized with the concepts that we've all kind of agreed on. And the input that I've gotten from the steering committee and the public and the planning commission. And present that to you guys at one of the planning commission meetings coming up. But I also am digging into now the actual chapter of the land use element in the general plan, because that's the basis for all of this. So we're looking at, we did have like the beginnings of an update from the consultants that John had worked with last year. So they started to kind of take his draft of the chapter 6 land use element and kind of revised it to make it look a little nicer, maybe a little more organized, but I still feel like there's just a lot in there in terms of the policies and the goals. It's kind of just this big catch-all, it feels like. And so when you read it, it's overwhelming and it doesn't feel like it's very digestible. So I'm starting to kind of break down those sections, and I think that's what would be nice to maybe have your input on at one of our future meetings is really looking at the policies and goals again, as they were identified back when John was working on this with the consultants, and see if we're all still in agreement or which ones could be consolidated. I think there's a lot of redundancy happening. So my goal would be to really narrow those down, make them meaningful, and get your guys' help on that. That seems like a good direction to go.
Would you do that in this meeting or do a separate workshop type meeting where we could, I'm just thinking it might require more time than we generally have. here.
I like the idea of a workshop. Yeah, I think we could do that, maybe even
Just the planning commission.
prior to the commission meeting, or I don't know, we could talk about how we want to set that up. Could be a separate night or day.
And Lisa, after that last meeting we had was, until this one, I think we had the longest and best discussion since I've joined the planning commission. this one was long and good too, and I call it good because we had differences of opinion and people spoke it, and I think that's how you get good decisions, as you just work through those differences of opinion, right? And I think in the end, maybe nobody's jumping up and down saying, hey, this was a great outcome, but I think all of us agree, hey, it worked out.
Yeah, no,
But
I
it-
agree. That's
the
actually one of the
discussion
things
was
that
good.
was
It
brought
was.
up in the planning commission session at the conference was it's really healthy for a planning commission to have some dissent.
Yeah.
Like you want to have at least somebody who's going to speak up and say something different and then have that discussion. Otherwise, if everybody's in agreement and nobody, and maybe they're thinking of something different, but they're not actually speaking their mind, that's not a healthy way to have a set up a planning commission. So I think we do have a really good.
We do have a good commission. And with that said, there were two things that happened along with all that discussion that it kind of occurred to me afterwards. One was, I mentioned Obi, I think after the meeting while we were walking out, maybe it was in here, I said, you know what? If that future land use plan had future zoning that was in accordance with what that applicant asked for, that would have been an easy decision. And your comment was absolutely.
Right, yes, and actually that could very well be part of we could fold that OAO revision effort into the future land use plan and have it start there, and then that would affect the land use code.
Even that last one, which was what, 5 units on that smaller lot, it looked, to me, it looked like that's where that future land use plan was moving anyway.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think in the end, we made the right decision by saying no and advising them to come back.
Right.
It may not turn out that way, but we're gonna certainly have good justification for doing what we did in that case.
Right,
But the other thing that happened is Aaron brought up some I would say, very heartfelt and good discussions about density bonus and other options. And the reason I like the idea about coming back to the council and having us maybe even with a workshop is, Aaron, I think that with that future land use plan, that's the place to look at where that belongs and where it doesn't. And that's where it's important to get your input, because I know you're one of the strongest in here with regards to increased density and, the different, I don't know if we call it the different uses of the code, I guess, within that future land use plan.
yes, that is definitely true. I think, one of the biggest things that's gonna come out of our future land use plan is we're looking at comprehensively, commercial and residential, but one of the biggest things for housing is going to be the new density bonuses that we'll be able to offer, which we just don't have right now. The land use code really doesn't have anything built into it except for the planned unit development density bonuses. But those are only allowed in large lot residential, small lot residential, and MFR. So almost all of our valley is zoned rural residential, right? And so right now, we actually don't have a lot of density bonus incentives in our land use code that we can offer developers, and that's a problem for sure, because people want that, and they wanna be able to increase their density, but we wanna be able to require the deed restricted units out of that, right? So it's just a matter of getting this done with our planning efforts, and then that will lead into the amendments to the land use code.
You gotta remember, you can't negotiate.
Well, but, I guess my point was the times for the negotiation is with this group and those
Right.
workshops.
Yeah.
So that the applicants can look at the zoning they've got for a piece of property and they can determine how to best use that, given those requirements, right? And then they go to Jared or whoever with their plan and.
Right now with our, when we do look at things, do we look so we have, I'm kind of confused, do we have a former, that 2012 is the future land use?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the current zoning.
Mm-hmm.
How often I've never looked at the old future land use.
It's not,
compared-
it doesn't propose anything
Okay.
visionary. It doesn't really propose anything out of the realm of what the zoning
Right.
map is.
Yeah,
right
okay,
now.
I was
So-
kind of like, well, where do we
Yeah.
use this now? Okay, okay.
I mean, we do
We
reference it
cite
down
it, but
there.
it's not very useful.
There's a
Yeah.
couple little, yeah, I mean, it does reference like the emerging nodes, right, rural node or whatever. There's some things that are.
It just seems
are
like
kind of-
we could make a tool that like is, you know, like you guys have and we like have it kind of thing that like we don't use the old
I
tool.
believe there was some such map of Thompson at one point, where they were, there was some area where there was gonna be, quote, their downtown, but that's not what it was called. And I think we did use it, saying, yeah, that makes sense for doing something up
Mhm.
there. But it was very nice to have a thing that basically said, oh, that's where you're gonna have some development. It may have been where they were gonna put a shop or restaurant.
There was
Uh-huh.
that lodge that's there, they were gonna try and trend a little bit more of like a business area.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah, the 2012 general plan or future land use plan might actually have some different things proposed for Thompson, because I just don't recall that it would have been.
Yeah, I don't recall, because I don't use that particular. section
Yeah.
as often.
We don't have to look at that very.
No,
Those
yes, we
pretty
do. I
mighty
think
five
we have,
campaign too.
JR's application and
Yeah.
it's seen this, so yeah, there's the commercial node thing on there.
Yeah, so that's the idea with this one and this, but this future land use plan is intended to actually, for the valley anyway, is intended to really be a lot more visionary, taking that next step and looking at like what should actually be happening in the valley that's different than what is now the status quo. Yeah. That's all I have for that update.
any future considerations?
We will have our applicants at our next meeting. There's
Yeah,
two, yeah,
we
for the
will.
interviews, so.
And then, I had one question, with your landscaping thing, how's that coming?
It is kind of on hold at the moment while we prioritize a couple of things.
Okay.
And I need to get back to it. Elisa came back from the conference with some materials for me that will be very helpful, but
Okay, yeah,
slow
so,
going, but going.
I got some.
Yeah, I think we were talking about the idea of having some public engagement,
Oh, yeah.
online outreach and maybe even like a workshop type thing to get the word out and start getting people's feedback. We also have the opportunity in front of our building that's all just bare weeds. We want to start putting in some landscaping there, and so we're gonna actually use that whole one section for
Garden
like a kind of an
demonstration.
example garden, yeah, landscaping.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Go ahead, some tumbleweed.
I'm gonna be remote in the next meeting. I wish I could be here for interviews. I think it'd be better, but,
Yeah, what date is the
unfortunately.
next meeting? Cause I
It's the
also have,
23rd.
yeah. Yeah,
And we do have to do, I know we've had set questions.
Mm-hmm.
Should I just ask people to come with a set question that they're going to ask the applicant? I'll put out a reminder on that.
Yeah,
People.
I think that's how you've done it before, is everybody would submit like 2 questions
Yeah.
to you and then.
Or I might just tell people they can ask. Well, yeah, I guess we don't want duplicate questions.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay,
And
I've-
just a heads up, I will not be able to attend the next meeting, so I'm not sure what that'll do for quorum. I'm away for a work conference and will not be able to attend.
We will
okay.
have 2
I'll
public hearings.
Steve
during
beat me
that
to the
meeting.
punch.
Are you not
That's the
gonna be
week
here?
before the folk fest and I'm gonna be probably working that evening.
Right, okay,
Um,
okay,
There's this like tiny chance that I'll be available,
okay.
but it's.
I mean, this,
go time,
it
so
might
I will
be,
try really
it
hard.
might be beneficial to actually, maybe even postpone till and the next meeting. which
We
would
mean
be-
postpone our general meeting altogether?
Yeah,
Or
like
just
maybe
the
just
public
skip it
hearing?
and then have
Okay,
that meeting with the interviews. And we have some public hearings.
the ADO items.
Oh, right,
Mm-hmm. But, again, that can be pushed.
yeah. Well, I mean, we
I have
could,
to contact the applicants like tomorrow, because they're picking up posters this
Mhm.
week.
okay.
So are you saying we're looking at just not doing the next meeting?
Possibly. I mean, I would leave that up to you all, obviously, but, without, I don't know what Tony's schedule is, but I know he's been out in the field a lot, so there's no guarantee that he will be able to attend.
That would push our next meeting to the 13th of November.
Right.
Oof. No, there's like such a small chance of it to make it, but I'm like,
End of years almost here.
But you would be able to make the November one, you think that would be good?
The first one.
I believe so, yeah.
Future. You guys have your lives planned out.
Oh, yeah. The sixth, or the 13th. For the second and fourth, is that what we are?
Since the 13th is the
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 13th.
first planning commission meeting in November is 13th. The second one is the 27th.
Yes, I would be able to make that one.
Oh, one day after Thanksgiving.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's
I
the week
wish Dan
before.
home this Thanksgiving. Okay,
Well, I'll send out an email. We can
Yeah.
kind of weigh in on that
I guess a good idea.
and decide.
Yeah, if
Okay.
there's nothing crucial, then
I mean, it always gives us more time
Yeah.
to work on all the things that we want to bring to you all. 2 weeks is such a short.
well, and it would be nice to have a fair number of people here to, assess the applicants.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And we
sorry,
can, that way we can keep Emily going.
Yeah, sorry, it's like the 2 weeks of my life that are absolutely just insane, so.
Understandable.
Are we ready to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
One second. All in favor, of course, there we are.
Yeah.
See you, Steve.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Good discussion tonight.
Bye.
Thanks.